We'll go ahead and get started. We have a packed session this morning. My name is Anna Guida. I am a program manager at Fourth, which is a nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon that does national work focused on transportation electrification. Charge at Home is a project of Charge at Work, or of Fourth, excuse me. And we are here today for our roundtable session, EV charging best practices and lessons learned. Some quick housekeeping. We will have folks on mute with their video off due to the amount of information we have to share during this session. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to those. And we will be recording all questions as well. This session will be recorded and shared on our website, which is chargeathome.org/events is exactly where this link will be shared. And yeah, we will get started. So Charge at Home provides free electric vehicle charging guidance, tools, and support to multifamily decision makers and residents. Some of these resources include market segmented installation toolkits for both new and existing market rate and affordable housing, and we're also working on condominiums and student housing as well. We have an EV charging project builder tool specifically for multifamily properties. We have educational one-pagers. We're developing case studies with folks throughout the country. We have a comprehensive glossary of terms, communication templates for property managers communicating with residents about EV charging. We also have resident empowerment resources and education sessions like this roundtable session. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to our moderator. I meant to mention we have Chris Moreno from Infinite Niches on, J. Richard Yu from Jamestown, James Pearson from Greystar, and Steve Boyack from JVM Realty. So Chris, do you want to take it away?
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. And I'm really excited actually here today in Atlanta, Georgia. And for all those who are in the chat, love to see where you're from. If you want to share your company, share where you're from. And then, of course, if you have any questions for us, feel free to add those. But we're going to have a lot of fun today. What I love is obviously, we've got some presentations put together. We've got some great speakers, but we've got some of the largest developers and operators and managers of multifamily real estate in the country, and they've seen it. They've seen so many different implementers, integrators, et cetera. So I'm just really excited about it because I'm very passionate about technology for real estate. As Anna said, I'm the CEO of Infinite Niches, and I focus mainly on investing and advisory in technology, and really have gotten to see over the last 15 years implementing technologies ourselves, but also partnering with great organizations. And I've really enjoyed becoming an advocate for the industry. So really excited about the partnership between RETC, RETTC, and you can find out more at rettc.org, and NMHC, the National Multifamily Housing Council, and the work they're doing with Force. So it's really exciting to create, as Anna said, the resources, engagement, and really to be agnostic. The goal here is not to push people to a certain direction. It's to share what we've learned. It's to share what we're still looking to discover. But it's to give you more clarity in your path to make the right decisions, not only as an owner operator, but also to have the best experience possible for your resident. And I think it's going to go without saying today, you'll hear from some of our guests that the movement of EV charging, there's many things that are promised in certain sectors, but we're now seeing EV adoption moving. And here in the state of Georgia, we have seen a big infrastructure boom in building EV plants and EV cars and batteries, and even upgrading the energy grid itself. So, today's going to really focus a lot on existing properties, but of course, feel free to ask questions across the board because many of the people here do, work with existing properties and they work with new types of properties. Another cool thing today is the guests also touch across many of their properties will have some elements, especially with Jay at Jamestown, and they get to share a little bit about the resident experience, but even they have the experience to draw from other sectors, whether it's hospitality or retail or office. So I get very excited about that too. In terms of thinking about safety, I think there's going to be some discussions around, the energy needs, safety, operations, infrastructure. Those are all really important topics for us to cover today. One of the other things I think about is usability. So one of the things I get excited about, I've used probably over 100 different public charging stations, having my own EV and going around. So it'd be really interesting to hear what people's perspectives are, especially from their point of seeing different types of charging operations, whether it's individual parking spots and dedicated spots to shareable spots. And so all the things that go in from the plan of seeing and thinking about a piece of land and a piece of space within a garage to all of the implementation and the usage from those residents. I'm also excited to hear about some of the data that we've been hearing. And obviously there's very different perceptions from the Sun Belt up to the northern part of the country, and then what you're seeing from, let's say, urban to suburban areas. Also from high rise and then low rise and mid rise apartment buildings as well. In terms of a important thing as well, I think my goal is to always hear and ask great questions. So again, feel free to ask those questions, but we've got a list of a few here, and then some that you in the audience have already pre-submitted that I'm really excited to ask. In terms of thinking about actions you can take as well, I want to make sure that you are taking a look. Feel free to bring up the fourth website if you haven't already, because that can be helpful to you to also help you through this. But on the screen, we're going to share some slides. So without further ado, I actually want to make sure I hand it over to our first guest, Jay. You can share your screen, and Jay Richard Yu with Jamestown. So I'll hand it over to him to share a little bit more about his bio and also what he's focused on for today.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for the warm introduction, and really excited to be a part of this panel today. And thank you to Fourth. Anna, feel free to advance the slide. I'm Jay Richard Yu, VP of Tech and Innovation with Jamestown in Atlanta, Georgia. We are a design-focused, vertically integrated real estate investment manager and service provider with over 40 years of experience. And our mission is to create places that inspire. So with that, placemaking is at the forefront of our pillars. And you might have either heard or visited several of our assets across the nation. And our current and previous projects include One Times Square and Chelsea Market in New York City, Industry City in Brooklyn, New York, Pont City Market, where I'm headquartered here in Atlanta, Georgia, Ghirardelli Square in San Francisco, the Innovation and Design buildings in Boston and Lisbon, and Groot Handelsgebouw in Rotterdam. So it's a really amazing portfolio of assets we have, not only across the US, but also internationally. And I have the pleasure to oversee all of our US assets as it relates to all initiatives under the tech and innovation umbrella. And specifically, we have had an abundance of experience and worked with a number of partners in the EV space. I started working with EV at my first property in Atlanta, Georgia, back in 2016. And I'm sure everyone on the call can agree that, with EV, I call it the wild, wild west. It is just constantly evolving, and there is so much of an opportunity ahead as, adoption increases, the technology evolves. There's more knowledge share like this panel and my esteemed colleagues that will share on today's call. The wealth of information and the opportunities ahead, especially in the multifamily space. And specifically, what I will be touching on are several of our assets that we have multifamily from an ownership and operations perspective. We have a number of assets in the Southeast as well as the Northeast. And Anna, if you want to advance the slide. One of the high-rise buildings that we debuted last year in Atlanta is called Signal House, as you can see on this slide. So this is actually attached to our mixed-use asset Pont City Market where I'm at in Atlanta. And there's also two additional multifamily dwellings on the campus site, but this one you're seeing at the top of your screen is Signal House with over 150 units. And there are essentially a hybrid of level 2 and level 3 chargers on the campus that is shared as an amenity for our residents. So I'm excited to dive deeper and go through all the questions this afternoon. And again, I'm Jay with Jamestown, and I'll go ahead and pass the baton over to James for his intro.
Thanks, Jay. Great to hear from you. Looking forward to the panel. I'm James with Greystar. Greystar, if you're not familiar, we're in 250 markets and we manage just shy of 1 million units. So we're just about everywhere, kind of a big name in multifamily. But as for EV charging, it's kind of been a space that we've been exploring and starting to leverage our scale to bring a lot of value to our clients and folks who are involved. So glad to be on this panel and glad to be part of the group who's sharing what lessons learned here. Personally, I've been in property technology for almost 5 years, and EV charging was just starting to hit the interest of, at the time, us venture capitalists, as we were trying to figure out what the future of that space was going to look like and how to get involved. So transitioning to kind of more of an operating and ownership focus has been really interesting to see sort of both sides. And I think as part of that, one of the areas that we see a need for thinking about the intersection of owners and managers and the growth of EV charging is to kind of combat some misconceptions. And so I wanted to share, I brought a few slides along that I thought were really informative that we've been pushing to our clients throughout this year. And that's that there's kind of three big shifts. The first is that prospects are really concerned about access to EV charging. And in a lot of markets, roughly a third of the folks that you would like to be leasing to are going to consider charging in their lease decision. So if you're a manager who thought that maybe you didn't have to think about charging, that's shifted substantially. And then that next chart, every major market is seeing this shift. The proliferation of the $200 Tesla Model 3 lease has made it so that in markets where we previously weren't thinking about charging, we have to be. And so we've really pushed ourselves and our teams to start figuring out how to meet these resident needs so that our properties can be competitive. And then finally, this kind of misconception that charging should be maybe a loss leader amenity or it's just an additional compliance tax on our operations, we also think is wrong. You can be very profitable in this. But those misconceptions are based on reality, and that is on this next slide, the ways that we've identified how charging can vary in perfect, thank you. How charging can actually materially impact a property. So we've started to measure the impacts on occupancy, rent, retention, revenue, all of these different angles that charging has a subtle but meaningful impact. And as we start to pay attention to how those are measured, we can start communicating to ownership groups and property managers how to implement those chargers and then make this amenity available at greater scale. And then finally, on this last slide, something that we've been sharing everywhere is kind of these performance archetypes. And we share this because we want folks to know that on one hand, charging can be super profitable and a great addition to your property. And a lot of folks seem to be missing this. But the skepticism and the concern about charging is also well-founded when we look at these negative outcomes that we've observed in different properties as well. And so really excited to be part of a group that's trying to address this. And just in the last year, some of the progress that's been made in this space to start getting these positive outcomes that make charging something more scalable that we can do in more places has been really encouraging. So with that, I want to turn the time over to Steve Boyack to introduce himself.
Hey guys, I'm Steve Boyack. Thanks, Chris and Anna, for the opportunity to participate. So I am Steve Boyack. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of JBM Realty, located in suburban Chicago. I'm also the president of our management company. And a lot of the decisions about the softwares and technologies that go into our properties today come through my office. So we are a vertically integrated investor in Class A multifamily in the Midwest. We have properties across 5 states, 22 properties, about 5,500 units. I've been in the industry for about 30 years or so, and have had the opportunity to work across multiple product types, virtually all of them new build, value add, and existing multifamily. So I have experience on this topic, coast to coast, product to product, and Today, the portfolio that we have is all acquired assets, typically tend to be in their first couple of years of existence, because they're in the Midwest and the requirements provided by a lot of the municipalities don't include EV charging. Some of the properties that we're purchasing, have no chargers, some a minimal of chargers. But what I haven't seen yet in any of the properties that we've purchased is kind of an organized strategy around deployment and, to James's point, profitability of these. And so we designed an execution across our portfolio. Every property will probably be getting anywhere from 2 to 20 chargers, a little bit of public charging, a fair amount of shared, and then also some dedicated chargers at properties that have that sort of demand. That is an area of the business that I think both I and we anticipate will continue to grow as people transition from gas to either hybrids or fully electric vehicles. With that, I think I pass it over to Chris.
Awesome. There we go. All right. Thanks, Steve. And so, yeah, we're going to dive in. We already have some submitted questions coming in. So because of the people, we've got some topics we want to cover, but I'm going to give kudos to those who already submitted when they filled out the form to jump in. And so I'm going to jump straight to that, and we're going to kind of do a round robin, the round table. So one of the ways we're going to do it here is allow each person to kind of share their take on each of these questions. So we're going to go first to Stanislav, who proposed this question. So what is the number one reason apartment owners hesitate to put in EV charging for its tenants, and how do you overcome that? So why don't we go ahead and start with Jay, if you'd like to maybe cover this, the number one reason why you would hesitate, but then how you were able to overcome that internally.
Yeah, I think it's two parts here. I think first is the education piece. I think there's a challenge in today's markets, especially you have seasoned uh, residential property managers and groups that have no idea what the EV world is, let alone where it's evolving and headed to. So I think it's important that the knowledge share is there, that, whether it's with corporate or talking to a third party, to share the story about how EV is evolving, and that it's now a necessity versus an amenity in the multifamily housing sector. In addition to that, taking a walk around the deck or your surface lot of the community, and also surveying your tenants, and identifying if there are an abundance of EV vehicles in the community. You can just get a first take there to understand what is the demand. And I think that would also be a catalyst to start that conversation and dialogue with the right people in the room to determine, is this something we need to move forward with? And I know there's a lot of hesitation with cost and infrastructure and a myriad of other objectives under this initiative. But if you're hearing feedback and identifying the need in your community, I think it first, should turn on the light bulb to spark that dialogue and that conversation, and then kind of work with industry peers. And I even all for canvassing other multifamily dwellings around the neighborhood to see if they're offering that as an amenity. That could also be a first mover advantage, to see if that is an opportunity to pursue. And I'm sure we'll dive into this later, but there's going to be incentives and opportunities to collaborate with the right partner vendor, to see what fits with your community and meeting the needs and expectations that will set you all up for success.
Great. And, Steve, would you like to go next on this one?
Sure. I mean, I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, uncertainty. I think a lot of owners and developers don't really understand the demand. The news has been all over the place. Today, sales are up. Tomorrow, sales are down. So it's hard to understand who to be listening to. I think the costs have also been fairly unknown to a lot of people. They hear big numbers. A lot of the providers that are out there right now have figured out ways to bring those numbers down, and to the point I think you just made about rebates and incentives being available. Those are a little bit maybe of a black box and seem like it's a lot of hard work to get to those. Also, with uncertainty around demand is also, I think, the complications of underwriting these. And that's why it's one of the reasons why we're really focused on a mix of uses, one of them being dedicated so we can get a monthly premium that's highly underwritable. And if there is a spread on the usage of the electricity, that becomes gravy on top of that spread. So I think, investors like to be able to underwrite things with certainty of returns. And this is, again, still a little bit of a black box for them. I think also if I know you have an electric car. I recently bought one. Understanding how the cars are used and really the maximum experience. You said you've used 100 public chargers. I've probably used 2. I like to charge my car overnight. That is, in my opinion, the optimal way to experience this. You wake up, you open your garage, you get in your car, and you have a full tank of gas every morning as you're hitting the road. And so I think as people who like to provide the best experiences for our end users, I think the best experience in this case is providing people the opportunity to do overnight charging. And so that's my take.
Great take. And James, obviously it's probably hard to nail down one challenge, but what is, obviously with 1 million units out there across the country, so many different decision makers, what are maybe the top 1 or 2 hindrances you've seen? And then maybe, do you come at it with a fact based? I think you have some great metrics. So how do you curtail that and how do you back that up?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to add EV charging at about 150 properties just this year. So we're trying to chase it in a lot of places. Incentive programs are a great thing to help with that underwriting. I agree with everything that Jay and Steve said. I think maybe I would flip the question around a little bit, knowing that there's a lot of EV industry people on this call, that they need to help us make this as an amenity kind of fit into our box. We're really good at knowing when parking lots need replacement, when we do roofs. We know the underwriting of if we add a pool, what that does to rent. Everyone's still scratching their head on EV charging. And so I think if the industry, the folks who are administering incentives can kind of help us understand what the impact is for properties, what types of costs we're looking at, and kind of help us think a little bit long term and really simplify the decisions. It's not too complicated. Everyone has a minimum return that they need to see, a payback expectation, and as far as the chargers themselves, it's extremely commoditized at this point. I need a basic level of service and a basic level of reliability, and to know that my resident, isn't going to come into the leasing office frustrated that their car didn't get charged overnight. As long as we're solving for kind of these basic things, I think it becomes really easy and really exciting to start launching. But somehow I think the industry got a little bit ahead of itself and skipped some of these really important steps.
Great. Well, I think, you did hit on, you all kind of hit on the incentive structure, right? Which has been the carrot or the stick. And in some places we're now seeing the stick, we're seeing the carrot. So, it might ask Whit to come off of mute as well to join in here, just to get your takes. I think one of the most important things when you're making decisions in real estate, you're trying to create a framework, right? In your decision-making process that you can then scale. If you're doing 150 installs, you don't want to have 150 different models. You want to have 1 or 2 and then scale that up. And I think the same thing applies to incentive structures with municipalities. Whit, if you wouldn't mind, especially your team and working with other real estate organizations and nonprofits and working with the Department of Energy, is that a key thing that you're all trying to focus on? Is applying a standard to where the incentives are much easier to work through and streamline through for the owners?
Well, that's a good question. I should mention my name is Whit Jamestown. I'm with Fourth, part of the Charge at Home team. I've been working on this project for a while and have been really involved in the EV charging at multifamily sphere for a little while. I think that's a great question. It's tricky. I think given the municipality differences across the US, you're seeing a lot of different approaches. I think over the coming years, we're going to start seeing more alignment on best practices, but it takes a while cities have a lot on their minds these days. And it's not just cities, it's counties, it's states, it's other authorities having jurisdiction as well. So yes, I think part of this project, this Charge at Home effort, this educational resource hub, is to provide those stakeholders best practices and resources and links to the industry and what people are saying. So great question, and I'm excited to engage with those stakeholders more. They're also particularly busy as well.
Yeah, that question came from Jesse in the audience. So I kind of want to give each of you, if you want to touch on the challenges and how maybe some best practices that you've learned from, maybe even mistakes from working with incentives. But is there something you've learned in a short snippet that stood out to you around the incentive program? Do you always go for incentives, or do you kind of actually say, hey, sometimes we don't need the incentives? And feel free to jump in, whoever'd like to jump in on each of these questions. That way, I don't have to call on you. I'd like for each of you to jump in where it makes sense.
I would
Yeah,
say
I
I'd
can
jump
go
in
ahead.
real quick. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
No, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, I mean, one of the problems that we've come into is the fleetingness of some of these incentives. You know, we have been made aware that they're available. We've started designing and engineering deployment programs in at least a couple of occasions that I can recall. They're gone, you know, and I don't even think they necessarily have been used up. They just go away by the time we're deploying. So, you know, for us, it's more of a try and design and deploy something that's affordable and has return metrics that work for us without the incentives. And if the incentives come, then it's, you know, it's gravy on top.
Great. I love that. You know, designing something where, you know, there is a need and you can show the ROI. You can show that, as James showed earlier, a third of residents appear to be looking for you know, this you need. I heard, and we actually had a thank you to the three people for the audience. We actually had more people wanted to be panelists on this than and there was high demand. But one of the other metrics that stood out to me from another owner they had shared was that they had planned for about 5 to 7 cars to be electric vehicles at their property, but they found out that because the other properties nearby, Steve, didn't offer them, they ended up having like over 30. And so it was incredible. They were just kind of blown away because they were marketing it so much and had to put in more chargers. Anything else that, you know, from a regulatory perspective, a municipality perspective, I think to this question, they were talking about incentives, but maybe are there any other types of things you think about, Jay and James, that have maybe surprised you on a municipality or a registration that you had to overcome?
Yeah, there's two examples, and this is more from the regulatory side. Looking at our assets that we have in California and New York, we really have to pay attention to the new laws and regulations. For example, in New York, there's a law called Law 55 that just came out where there has to be a certain percentage of parking spaces dedicated to EV, but there's layers in between that because there are different types of structures and the age of your parking decks and garages that have different numbers that pertain to that law. And on the flip side, over on the West Coast with California, the same deal there. There has to be at least 10% for every 100 spots dedicated to EV. And we are running across an infrastructure issue where we don't have the capacity. And we've had to apply for waivers with the municipality as sort of like an infrastructure waiver where, you know, we just can't meet that law or be compliant. And so we've bought ourselves time to figure out how we solve for that. And so we're having some challenges there of navigating that with our on-site teams as well as the municipality and finding the right vendor that could help us, you know, achieve compliance by X date that we need to. So those are some of the challenges and nuances that we have to experience, and part of the process too. And this, what I call again, wild west of EV, is just trying to stay on top of, you know, these types of regulations and, you know, what's coming up.
Great. Another question came up here, James, too. So some good topics there. But around, you know, you've got probably some metrics across metropolitans. Are there any markets where you've been surprised by the EV adoption rates at your properties?
Yes, lots of markets. It's actually really challenging to understand what EV adoption is going to look like. And I think Steve said it best, where you add a couple chargers, all of a sudden you have this fantastic leasing advantage, and then EVs just show up out of nowhere. So today we don't look at zip code level data or any information other than we kind of have our own custom model that we run in-house to say how many EVs do we think is going to be at this property, and we really try to hone it in, and we find it can be a huge difference just across the street in terms of what type of renter demographic has been attracted and who has an EV and who doesn't. So it can be really surprising what happens. Fortunately, if you are seeing that kind of occurrence, you have a huge leasing advantage that you should probably start measuring. Steve's property sounds like they were the most competitive in that market because of that reason, and so that's something that more operators could probably key into.
Chris, I'd add real quick too, similar to other areas of our business where we pull the staffs on site and ask them what the numbers are in the garages. It's amazing how often they're not accurate, just because staffs go home at night and everybody comes home from work. Almost 100% of the time that we've walked a garage after hours, the guesses have been double, triple, even quadruple with the staffs. And frankly, also some of the cars these days also don't look like spaceships. So they're a little bit harder to identify as an EV. They might not know that maybe it's a plug-in hybrid or whatever. And so, building on some of the points that have been made, like one of the lessons learned for us for sure is that you got to kind of skate to where the puck's going on this topic, in my opinion, is you can install what you believe are the appropriate number of chargers for today's demand, but my advice is to design and build EV capability and not just EV chargers on the wall. And so, obviously it's always cheaper either at new construction or retrofit to add the additional capacity. You don't necessarily need to hang the chargers until the demand exists. But I think from a marketing standpoint as well, there's a lot of power in walking past parking spaces and seeing chargers, and then walking past additional parking spaces and seeing signage that says EV capable. They don't necessarily need to see the charger to be to have that comfort level that should they buy or should they bring their EV, that there's going to be capacity for them to join the team.
It's so important, those little delineations between capable versus ready. And then, like you mentioned earlier, having dedicated spots for people versus shareable spots. I think, to your point, it's funny, you'll go by a building in the middle of the day, nobody's using the chargers, everyone's at work. Yeah, at night, and you talk to the residents, I've seen this on numerous occasions where you'll say, oh, how do you like charging? They go, they're just always full. Can't get one. And so you got to get home early, get that spot, because people are obviously falling asleep at night and not going to move their car. I think from a parking perspective too, and maybe Jay, if you want to touch on that question, but this question we have here around, Jamestown specifically has so many unique models of parking. You could have a high rise, but you could also have office, you could have other things nearby. So how do you think about the parking? Do you, maybe in the past, I would assume, the parking spots for charging were in one spot. Do you think now about having them in multiple locations spread across your properties so that someone in one side of the property doesn't have to hike a half a mile to get to their car?
Yeah, it's a great question, and our bread and butter is mixed use, so it's components of retail, food and beverage, office, multifamily, and at some sites hotel. And I think that the notion back in the day when EV was first coming out was let's just put it all the way in the corner back of house where nobody can find it, right? And the perception has drastically changed, especially with a lot of the OEMs now getting into the space of providing L3s and supercharging experiences, where they actually want to be in the forefront, like as close as possible to where all of the action and the energy is. And so as we look at some of our sites, whether it's here at Pont City Market in Atlanta or others, where we're looking to build, especially at a multifamily capacity, we have to take that into consideration, especially with our development and leasing and property management teams, of finding the ideal locations, obviously depending on the number of units, and then making space for the actual cabinets and transformer and dedicated spaces it will take in a traditional parking lot setting. We try to do our best to find that ideal location, but there have been some challenges, whether it is with lease obligations in a mixed use environment or infrastructure that we have to take into consideration. But I think moving forward, and we're making it a priority, especially with new developments and acquisitions, is that if there is a demand for EV or if there's no presence, we need to prioritize this and dedicate an area where we put this strategically, and that's not just an afterthought and in the corner like it has been at other centers and communities. So there's a lot of homework to be done, but I'm having a team to champion this will be the change makers in how we perceive this moving forward.
Awesome. And James, if you want to touch on that, but also this question around, thinking about not only, as Jay touched on, of the locations of the chargers, but access to the energy and the grid, and how important the energy and load management, because many people may not even know about that when they're first jumping into this. How do you think about that load management, energy, and then partnering with the energy companies?
Yeah, every property is a snowflake. So there's so much variation, so much nuance. But it's a funny thing. We talk about details about where the chargers go, and I think in part because it's visible and it's complex. But I've never taken the time to ask where our router modem should go. Right? I just bring in a consultant who knows what they're doing, and they do the job right. And so I think this is a situation where, as owners and operators, we shouldn't be in the business of becoming the world's best charging experts. And frankly, we have too many things on our plate to become the world's best person at this. So my advice to people is find a partner you like and trust to do that for you, and who's done a lot of these projects. So at Greystar, we in-housed this. There's some other firms out there who will help you capitalize the chargers, who will help you plan it. Go find someone who's done this a lot and is good at this, rather than making this up as you go. I think that's where the worst projects that we've seen have been a handful of folks who are really smart and really good at multifamily housing, who've never done chargers before and made a lot of mistakes. So find someone who can do it for you.
I would really echo what James is saying. I think this is a space that's going to continue to change at light speed, and it's not something that we want to maintain any sort of in-house expertise towards. So finding that right partner is certainly critical.
Yeah, I'm always curious too, the connections as you're, thinking about within any organization, whether it's a large one or a smaller one, and many of the people in our audience are all different sizes. As you mentioned, bringing in a consultant and making sure you're learning best practices and tools and who's out there. But number two, thinking through the decision-making process of, implementation, installation to actual execution of marketing and operations and ongoing feedback and resident ratings. How are you all tracking those resident ratings and the actual implementation and the actual day-to-day usage versus just the installation? Do you have any metrics on that? Is anyone tracking that?
I would say yes, for sure. But back to a comment that you made earlier and what we were just talking about being the expert. I have found to date with a few of the different partners that we've used, their dashboarding tools are kind of wholly inadequate to being true advisors to us on overall experience. We are a very metrically based industry, right? We know that when this hits this number, we're going to add one, or this hits this number, we're going to add one. To understand what a truly A-class experience is for an EV owner, and how many cars per charger, and the times and days, and what are all those moving parts. And so we've spent a lot of time with different partners that we're working with, advising and requesting additional capabilities within their dashboards so that we can slice and dice the data to get more educated. But frankly, also at the end of the day, we need to hear, you hit a certain number, you need to add, because people aren't going to come in and complain. And the last thing we want to do, the whole purpose of the chargers is to attract and retain additional residents, not frustrate them, not hear about it, and then have them move out because they can never get a charger when they need one. So we want to have the tools in place to stay ahead of demand.
I
Great.
think that
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
yeah, in our experience too, just what Steve said too, the dashboards that we have access to don't really paint a full picture in terms of the sentiment and making immediate decisions. I think it's a combination too of what do we hear out in the field with the on-site management team? What are we actually hearing from residents? Are we surveying and keeping tabs of their experience to retain them? Additionally, there's forums out there with EV users to also take into consideration. And I think that has also gone missed because we've done a little bit of our own digging on the corporate side, just trying to identify what the feedback is, whether it's broken cables or I'm being charged too much or accessibility. And we've got to take those into consideration. So I think, yeah, as the industry evolves, especially with our partnerships, and we really drill down into what matters, I think it's going to be imperative as we see more of this data in a dashboard view, so that we can actually make better decisions in this process.
Great. And James, have you seen I'm sure you've seen a few things here. And to Jay's point, I am pretty shocked when I do see a high speed 1,000 mile an hour charger being charged the same as an L2, charging at 1/10 the speed, and people wondering why nobody's using it. Are you getting feedback and seeing disparity across decision making across the properties you're in, James?
Of course, that's a great question. I think maybe going to some of the earlier points that Steve and Jay were making, there's a big shift that we're seeing in multifamily operations where this is no longer a box to check, I have this amenity, but we are now in the business of operating EV chargers. And it's challenging because our leasing staff and our on-site teams are already too busy. So we need to figure out how to centralize that expertise and have someone else do the thought work. I recently shadowed a property manager. By the end of the day, I think I counted like 40 different systems this person had to log into. And so while dashboards are useful, I cringe at the thought of having another dashboard for anyone to look at. What I really want is a dashboard that takes action, that solves something. And so that's, I think, a combination of, whoever our central person on staff is focused on charging, or my partner being able to go in and monitor this information. I can tell you, if I see a charging station that's used more than 30% of the day, that's an indication that I need to put another charger at that property. If it's below 20%, that's an indication that it's probably not a profitable charger. And so I'm really trying to hit that sweet spot, which is really challenging. That's a pretty narrow band of profitability and everyone being happy. So that's what we're trying to kind of chart things towards, and it takes a lot of data and some expertise. And the reality is my property managers have too much else going on, so it's not going to be their business, but it does have to be someone's business who is a operator of EV chargers. I think to your question about capacity, putting these fast chargers on, putting level 2 chargers, putting level 1 chargers, there's a lot of strong opinions there. But at the end of the day, the level 2 system is proven. That's what folks expect, and that's what we can pencil most of the time. So that's kind of where we're going that way.
Great. Another question here is, and great, thank you to the audience for submitting questions, topics. A lot of great experts that are coming in the room, and really appreciate that. So keep them coming. We'll try to get to as many of the questions here. Another question is, what do you see as next on the horizon, or maybe something you thought about, but maybe it's going to come up in the future for you? Maybe you're testing right now. Is there something you're trialing, testing, thinking about that you're excited about that could make a big impact? Maybe that's scheduling, of chargers, or maybe it is, like you said, testing different levels of charging or different types of data loads. Anything out there that you're seeing that's interesting that maybe you're trialing? And maybe we'll start with you, James.
Yeah, I'm excited about microgrids. So that's when we have battery storage, energy production, typically solar, and consumption occurring at the same property. And when you get that trifecta, all of a sudden the investment looks super attractive, and we've created an additional revenue line for the property that was kind of not seen before. So I think that's what's coming next, and what that requires from the industry is a lot more integration and a lot, I can't have 3 or 4 different partners who are all trying to integrate with each other to do that. I need one group who can do it all.
Great. And then, I'll ask you too, Jay, and maybe was there a top lesson learned within your organization from something you had tried or used, or something that you learned from another org? Because, many people oftentimes will make one decision and someone else will inherit that decision. And I know you've worked across different orgs. So is there a lesson learned that maybe you learned from someone else or maybe yourself that you could share with others here?
Yeah, absolutely. At one of our mixed use assets in Atlanta, we inherited some charging units from a company I've never heard of, and we actually received incentives from Georgia Power. But come to find out, the incentives had an expiration date, and so that was, that kept me wondering, like, why, what are we doing here? There's an opportunity to work with another partner, and I'm sure we could get, an even more better deal and experience a greater, rev share, ancillary revenue income generator through this program. And we're now going through that process now of doing a rip and replace. And it was a huge lesson learned that, you have to pay attention to those incentives and rebates and know that they may not last forever. And, especially if it's not on a contractual renewal agreement, that there are opportunities to, exit out of that and grow into a different partnership with someone else. And so you don't feel like you're married to it. And the technology, as we all know, is constantly evolving. So these units have been in for a couple of years, and in my brain it's like, okay, they're pretty much obsolete because I know they're not making this particular model anymore. They're going to charge us more to replace it, and the maintenance agreement is crazy. And so it's a lesson learned there to, keep an eye out on the market. And, if you have current EV or you're inherited in EV program, and understanding, what was set up, and see what you can do to potentially reimagine that, especially if there's opportunity to grow that and provide a better service and experience for your residents or your guests. And, I think that's a huge driver for us, is just constantly, doing our research and talking to our industry peers and the experts as we continue to navigate this space and grow it.
Great. And yeah, Steve, anything from your org or that, have you seen that maybe was a big lesson learned?
To me, it's just the managing the change of this whole thing. Like I said at the top, we're buying a lot of existing assets, and in some cases from less sophisticated owners, developers, or operators. And we're taking over sites that have open outlets in the garages that people are just plugging into with no program around it. We have taken over a number of properties that had residential quality chargers on the wall, and residents were either allowed to charge for free or maybe they were charged an extra couple dollars a month, but with no measurement of who's using it, no penalties, no way to get people on and off the charger. And so the concept of shutting down a lot of these outlets, bringing in actual chargers that have subscriptions or registrations to them, creating opportunities for ourselves to actually get a return on that investment. And I think the other thing is just kind of know the market around you. Meaning, you brought up the high-speed chargers and all that. I think on the first one we set up, maybe our charge per kilowatt hour was considered or perceived by the residents to be high versus the superchargers that were nearby. And so making sure that you have an understanding of what the market's doing, and then have a marketing pitch for the site team so that they understand. Because like Jay was saying, this is like one more thing that, or I think it was James that said it, one more thing that the on-site folks need to be experts at. We need to arm them to be able to present this in a way that just makes a lot of sense for the users.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think a lesson that I learned too was you think about how much the average person drives a day, right? And so a lot of cars, you might only drive 20 miles or 30 miles, especially folks who live in the urban areas. But people who live in suburbs or have an Uber or Uber drivers, I asked my Uber drivers, they drive 300 miles a day. 400 miles a day. So I was like, wow, okay, those people really need charging every single day, whereas I may only need charging once a week or once every 3 days. So, I'm curious, James, were there any other, as they both shared some things that stood out, what was maybe something that really surprised you or shocked you when you were diving into this, especially with your investor hat on, diving into the actual operations of EV charging?
Yeah, I was shocked how tight the margins are for profitability across the board. This is a complicated system that requires, a lot of hardware, a lot of software, and then some great operators. And it really takes everyone performing at a really high level to crack even just, an acceptable return level. So, incentives, I think, are really going to be key for the next 5 to 10 years in this.
Did we lose James? Did he freeze? Oh, James, I think you're back. You think you froze for just a.
Sorry about that. Where'd you lose me?
Yeah, you're back. I think you said we're going to need incentives for the next 5 to 10 years, and then it froze.
Yep, and until we can consistently deliver a return without those. So partners are starting to figure that out. Technology is getting better, but it's tight all around. There's not anyone who's running away with a bag of money on this one.
Great. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who maybe maybe they've done one install, or maybe they've done zero, but what's a piece of advice in terms of maybe something you've read about or something that you learned that could help them in starting their journey? Maybe Jay, if you want to start with this one.
Yeah, I think, I think about my time when I started diving into this space as a part of my role, and I really, there wasn't an EV department here at Jamestown or my previous employer with North American. And so I think, having somewhere to go with resources and experts insights. I mean, even with Fourth, and there's summits like the EV summit that's annually in Vegas. Um, and there's podcasts, I'm sure, an abundance of webinars like this is important to, just attend as much of these as you can to understand the space and talk with like-minded people. We're all experiencing these issues and challenges and understanding how to navigate this space that is just constantly evolving. And, what was tough is just, there are an abundance of partners and just figuring out, who's the right one to work with. And I think sharing this knowledge and the experience and by going to these webinars and having these resources available will help, easily navigate through this as it becomes, the chain will start to go down and we'll get to a point where, okay, I think this will become a well-oiled machine. But I think, when you're starting off, just having a short list of people and organizations and resources you can turn to is going to be paramount as you start to develop and roadmap your strategy.
What was the biggest help to you, James, in this process, and maybe a piece of advice for people, as you go down the rabbit hole?
I feel like I've turned over almost every rock at this point, having been at it as an investor or an operator. We've kind of looked at it a lot of different ways. I've met with a lot of different groups. There's a lot of smart, great people out there. But if I was giving advice to an asset manager who had, a $50,000 budget to add chargers at their property, my response would be, don't waste too much of your time on this. You can really sink a lot of time and effort into trying to become an expert in charging when you should go find one.
And Steve, if you'd like to share maybe your go-to or maybe something, your piece of advice.
I mean, my piece of advice would be it's been said earlier, find the right partner for sure. And then also match the technology to the buildings, right? Because we have, to James's point, I probably spent the better part of a year of my life digging into this and meeting everybody and going down the rabbit hole. And for a minute, I felt like an expert at it and was exposed to kind of where it's going to in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. And I got really distracted by all of that. I think that the tools and technologies that are available today, a lot of the partnerships that are out there are fine to meet the existing needs. So, kind of get started on it. But we also partnered with one or two groups to just test out their technologies. And of course, everybody's got somebody who worked at Tesla on their team. to impress you with. But you know, at least 2 of those occasions, the technology just didn't work, and thankfully we tested it and didn't expose it to our residents yet, because that could have been a disastrous outcome. So, I mean, take the time to know who your partner is, and then also make sure you're getting the right technology in your buildings.
Yeah, what's great is there's no shortage, especially here in the link, and I know great team here supporting all of the questions you all have and links to resources. And I know you know, the fourth team helps pull together a lot of these sessions. There's going to be, Anna will share that shortly, as well as oh great, and here's Anna. So I'm going to hand it back over to Anna shortly. I know I want to thank first off Steve and Jay and James for coming on to share. But I know we're also, I think, going to have a panel hopefully in the future with Retzi, with NMHC, and with Anna and the fourth team. So Anna, I'll hand it back over to you if you're ready to rock.
Yes. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Chris, Jay, James, Steve, Whit as well, for a great session. And I'm super happy this is recorded and will be shared on our website. Like Chris mentioned, we do have an upcoming roundtable session. We have one every month through at least September. Our next session will be on June 26th, same time, with Orange Charger, and we'll be focused on right-size charging, matching EV infrastructure to real-world behavior in multifamily. We'll have some great case studies as well. So we're super looking forward to it. I believe the registration link for that was dropped in the chat. If you would like to stay in touch with us, there is my email. We also have a new newsletter, which I just included, or Stuart just included in the chat. So yeah, stay tuned, visit our website, check out our resources. There's information about Roadmap for this very big conference we're hosting in Detroit this year to check out. And yeah, just a great session and a great time. And thank you for all the great questions. We appreciate everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, awesome, everyone. And yeah, those
Thank you, guys.
dropped in the chat there too. So will we keep it live for another minute or so, Anna, for people to be able to chat?
For sure.
Right. That way we have the resources. So for anyone who's looking, I see there's quite a few questions here, but also links. And then I know some people have dropped their contact information. So I do want to allow, you know, Steve, just as we're finishing up, Steve, Jay, or James, any other last things you'd like to add, share, or even a question you have for the audience of something you need help with?
I'll just say, if you're from a utility or you manage an incentive program, would love to be your partner. Greystar probably has a presence there. We're looking for folks who can be good with us and to figure out how to access those funds with you. So would love to be in touch. I'm james.pearson@greystar.com.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Yeah, this is great. Again, thank you to our esteemed panelists on this roundtable. They are full of information, and we could have continued to keep going. I know we had quite more questions. They are a wealth of knowledge, but we'll continue to have more sessions in the future, and we'll probably see them on stage at one of the upcoming events this year. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, we'll stay on for just another minute or so, and then we'll close it out. But thank you, Steve and Jay and James as well, and Anna and the team at Fourth for putting this all together.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.